painted faces, waving rainbow flags, carrying balloons. That's how the thousands of Israelis express themselves at Jerusalem's Pride Parade.
We wouldn't have had to march if this parade hadn't required security, snipers and undercover policemen. And we wouldn't have had to march if homo wasn't used as a curse in schools, but rather a simple self-identification.
Whenever I am in Jerusalem, I encounter homophobia. Only now on my way to the parade, I received some comments from people telling me that participating in this parade hurts them.
The event took place for the first time on the 1st of June under Israel's new government. With critics of LGBTQ+ rights holding counter-demonstrations, it was a high-security occasion in the conservative city. On the 7th of June, hundreds of protesters gathered at the Glendale Unified School District headquarters in California. They shouted and scuffled. The reason? Differing opinions. Should schools celebrate Pride Month? Should they have an LGBTQ+ inclusive curriculum? The split was palpable. Another protest erupted in another part of the world. On the 19th of June, the last day of Trans Pride Week in Istanbul, the Pride Parade was banned. Police closed off dozens of streets in the city centre, and some trans individuals were even detained. Despite the blockade, trans activists turned out to march against the discrimination. They chanted, "We are trans, we are here," until the march was dispersed by the police. Across many countries, Pride Month celebrations are in full swing. But so is the rising backlash against LGBTQ+ rights. Widespread discrimination continues to shape LGBTQ+ people's lives in both subtle and significant ways. How are they fighting for equality in India and abroad? Let's explore. The Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York's Greenwich Village, became a flashpoint. On June 28, 1969, the LGBTQ+ community members clashed with police after they were harassed during a raid. Before and during the 1960s, there were several laws that prohibited public sexuality in the United States. There were restrictions on gays and lesbians meeting and moving around, and raids on their establishments were quite common.
The thing about the Stonewall riots that's often overlooked is that it involved participation from all corners of the LGBTQ community, particularly trans women of color, who were at the forefront of those riots. And as much as we think about the modern LGBTQ rights movement as being perhaps defined by the quest for same-sex marriage or to allow gay and lesbian members of the armed services to serve openly, it has been just as much a battle for the rights of transgender folks. And in some senses, the country, the United States, has come a long way since 1969.
The harassed gay customers at the Stonewall Inn took a stand, and a riot broke out. Soon, other gay men and women defended these customers and started throwing objects at policemen. Although the crowd dispersed at the time, the next night, more than 1,000 gay protesters from nearby areas assembled outside the inn. The riots are widely considered as the takeoff point of the gay liberation movement. Thus, every year, the month of June is celebrated with colorful parades to remember this watershed movement. Yet, the status of LGBTQ+ rights remains murky.
It's really important to look back to the Stonewall riots. Marsha P. Johnson was a Black trans woman. Sylvia Rivera was a trans woman of Puerto Rican, Venezuelan descent. Stormé de Lavery was unashamedly butch lesbian who was also a drag king. So when we look at the Stonewall riots, we need to remember how diverse the heroes of our movement really are.
As the world's understanding of diverse sexual identities and gender expressions has grown, so has the acronym used to describe them. LGBTQIA+ is an abbreviation. It encompasses people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual. These terms are used to describe a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. LGBTQ+ people also differ in how much they have in common with other subgroups within the LGBTQ+ population. Many transgender people feel sidelined. They say gays and lesbians are put front and center at issues that concern the community.
Unfortunately, the LGBTQ community, there are plenty of instances of racism, misogyny, and transphobia, instances of racism, misogyny, and transphobia in the general population. We're seeing this more recently, with respect to especially gay men who are more conservative being more openly transphobic and calling for example, for the LGBTQ acronym to drop off the T and the Q. Signaling that these folks are no longer interested in fighting for the rights of trans and queer people more generally. When you look at the history of the fight for LGBTQ rights, there have been a lot of junctures at which particularly gay men and lesbians, particularly white, wealthy gay men and lesbians, have sought to advance only their own interests and not working on behalf of the trans community.
So, who is a transgender? A transgender person is someone whose gender identity does not associate with the sex they were born with. Many experience gender dissatisfaction, which is why they seek to transition, often adopting a different name and set of pronouns in the process. Such as most trans women will use female pronouns, she or her. Trans men often use male pronouns, he or him. Gender-neutral pronouns are they, them in the singular sense. Transgender people may pursue gender-affirming care such as hormone replacement therapy and various gender-affirming surgeries. Meet India's first transgender beauty queen winner, Nitasha Biswas. She was chosen as Miss Trans Queen India 2017. And she went on to represent her country in the Miss International Queen pageant in Thailand. Nitasha opted for a sex reassignment surgery. She says the procedure was grueling, but for her, not having the surgery was not an option.
Nobody wants to undergo surgeries, right? Surgeries are painful. We have so much of, injections, syringes, and pain after the surgery. But then, this is a kind of how the World Health Organization has declared that gender dysphoria was no more a mental disorder. It was a sexual health problem like any other man or woman might have. So after that was declared, but then I have transitioned way before that. So, things were a little tough for that time, but then it was not impossible. Transition is nothing to do with, it's not about just a surgery, it's about your mind. It's about, fitting your mind in a new box of new emotions.
Trans rights! Now! Trans rights!
Transgender people continue to face widespread discrimination and transphobia in many parts of the world. J.K. Rowling, celebrated author of the Harry Potter series, has been called transphobic for her views on gender identity. She has criticized the use of the phrase people who menstruate and suggested that trans women could pose a threat to cisgender women. In an essay on her website in 2020, she wrote, "When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside." Should trans women be allowed into women-only spaces?
I've been really saddened that J.K. Rowling has been promoting so-called gender-critical viewpoints. There's no conflict between women's rights and trans rights. In fact, when J.K. Rowling speaks out in the way that she does, she's not only weakened trans rights, she's also undermined women's rights. J.K. Rowling's views are transphobic.
Violence against transgender people is widespread.
Entonces uno agarró así como un arma así larga que tenían.
Recently, a group of transgender women opened up about their suffering under Argentina's dictatorship from 1976 to 1983. Brutality and bloodstains on mattresses and cars which they were forced to wash out. Julieta Gonzalez and her fellow trans women recall these horrific scenes and more. As they stepped inside the building where they were held for a month by the Argentine military dictatorship.
He bends my arm like this and takes me to a room downstairs. And well, yes, that is rape, because no is no. The police took our money, took us to jail, made us clean up, sexually molested us.
Gonzalez and other transgender women testified at the trial of former security officers in April this year on charges of crimes against humanity.
For the first time in Argentina's history, a member of the police and military are being investigated for the events suffered by a group of 8 transgender women who were brought to this place and were tortured, raped, and subjected to slave labor.
Que fueron torturadas, que fueron violadas, que fueron sometidas a trabajo esclavo.
Their stories are hard to hear, but things have been changing for the better in Argentina. More than a decade ago, the country approved a landmark gender identity law. It removed barriers to legal gender recognition, such as the need for medical diagnosis, gender-affirming surgery, or the opinion of a judge. Let's look at the issues that trans people face in India now. The country has a population of over 1.4 billion, and nearly 4.8 million people identify as transgender. This is according to the 2011 census, which was the first census to recognize the transgender population while collecting the data. Transgender people are commonly known as Hinjalas in India. The community has been mentioned in ancient literature. However, the Hinjala identity is complex. Most Hinjalas consider themselves to be third gender, neither male nor female, and not transitioning to either. In 2014, in a landmark ruling, India's Supreme Court recognized transgender people as a third gender. Yet they struggle to access education, healthcare and jobs.
If someone tells you, "You don't look transgender," "Oh my god, you look like a real guy," these are not compliments. It says...
This is Adam Harry, India's first transgender pilot. Harry was assigned as female at birth, but transitioned to male. He says he was declared unfit for flying on the grounds that he was receiving hormone replacement therapy. His fight against transphobia paved the way for a more inclusive workspace. The Directorate General of Civil Aviation for the first time framed new medical guidelines. Another person who brought in transformation for the trans community in India is Padma Lakshmi. In March this year, she became the first transgender from the state of Kerala to become a lawyer. The journey was far from easy. Lakshmi had to fight many misconceptions and prejudices along the way.
Recently, I went to the commissioner officer for putting in complaint against one anti-social and anti-LGBTQ. Some officer asked, "What is LGBTQ?" This is a systemic issue, systemic failure. It's a curriculum failure because we need to change the curriculum. We need to upgrade the textbook. We need to provide more classes to the authority. These are important factors.
But the transgender community still faces serious difficulties in accessing job opportunities.
The 92% of transgenders, educated transgenders, not getting the job, employment issue. Some people are providing job to the trans or queer people and tell to others, tell to the society, I provided job to one member. This is like a favor. Job is a right, not one person's favor.
Today, Lakshmi wants to use her legal education to ensure justice for the poor and marginalized in the community.
Private hospitals, I'm not blaming to any persons in any hospitals. Some person is feeling not good to the treatments. Lots of data issues, privacy issues, discrimination issues. I'm working with our IMG for making a protocol, transgender health protocol. Kerala government inaugurated creating a protocol in order to avoid the medical negligence, in order to avoid discrimination. The government is planning to correct all those things. Need a proper guidelines.
Trans people exist across all classes, races, castes and countries. But their recognition has always come at a cost, with added struggle. Let's take a look at some of the sectors where transgenders have persistently been discriminated against.
This law prohibits men from competing on a team or as an individual against women in college sports.
Texas enacted a law limiting transgender athletes in June this year. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott signed into law a controversial bill banning transgender athletes from competing in college sports teams.
Women's sports are being threatened. Some women are being forced to play against biological men. Women's college athletic teams are being threatened. Collegiate records that women set are being threatened. Women's sports, women's records, women's teams, women's dressing rooms, all are jeopardized when men are allowed to compete for those teams, for those titles.
The bill, known by supporters as the Save Women's Sports Act, requires athletes to play in the team that corresponds with their gender at birth, regardless of their gender identity. Proponents of such restrictions have argued that transgender women have a physical advantage over cisgender women, and that the regulations give female athletes equal opportunities to compete. Opponents find such restrictions discriminatory. In December 2020, Elliot Page revealed in an Instagram post that he is a transgender man. The Umbrella Academy star's announcement was met with an outpouring of love, but he also faced prejudice. Page, who charmed America as a precocious pregnant teenager in Juno and constructed dreamscapes in Inception, took years to come out in the open. Despite the hate against him, the Oscar-nominated actor is committed to ensuring that the world accepts and understands trans people everywhere. Transgender representation in entertainment has taken small steps in recent years.
I want to invite you to open your heart and your feelings to feel the reality.
In 2018, Daniela Vega became the first transgender presenter at the 90th Academy Awards ceremony. It took the Academy nearly 90 years to give a transgender such a platform. From the United States, Danica Roem is the first openly transgender lawmaker in America after she was elected in 2017. To Honey Mahogany, who became the first black openly transgender person to win an elected post in California in 2020. Transgender people have gained prominence in politics not only in the US, but across the world. In the Philippines, Geraldine B. Roman became the first ever transgender politician to be elected to the House of Representatives. In India, Shabnam Mausy Bano is the first transgender to be elected to public office. She was an elected member of the Madhya Pradesh State Legislative Assembly from 1998 to 2003.
The injustice, public stares.
Trans persons are particularly vulnerable to human rights violations when their name and sex details in official documents do not match their gender identity or expression. And change will come only when power can be given to them. States have the power to put an end to the ordeal faced by trans and gender diverse persons and foster their education. And one of the beginnings was this. Nearly 9 years after the historic National Legal Services Authority NALSA judgment of the Supreme Court of India, which recognized transgender persons as a third gender and issued directions to protect their rights and dignity, the movement to secure reservations for trans people in public education and employment is gaining momentum. But there's a long way to go. Transgender people continue to face hatred and discrimination, whether on the streets, at school, for work, at home, or at the hands of government officials. It is only through public education, policy change, and community efforts that change can be brought about. Trans lives matter, and it's time the world starts taking note of it.